I think there was the point around what's good online math tutoring and how does it differ from good in person. I'm not convinced there's a massive difference. And the reason, assuming you have all of your tools at your disposal in a face-to-face lesson, because I do think the speed to which you can access resources online is probably a bit quicker than fishing them out of your bag or taking them off a bookshelf or getting to the right page, etc. It's not to say that it's super quick, because sometimes it does take time, particularly if there's big PDFs, etc. But I think there's a couple of things which I've been talking to a few maths teachers about, and again, it's not necessarily specific to maths. You could argue that it would be cover other subjects, but independent tasks. When you're sat next to a student, you're saying, right, so we've done our exposition, we've done our worked examples. Now, what we'd really like you to do is to do these couple of questions. When you're sat next to them, that can be a little bit awkward because you're wanting to watch them do it, but then equally they feel watched, and you're probably sat quite close to them. So I always tell tutors to try and sit around a right angle of a table, so that there's just a little bit of distance, because so you're not directly next to them. It also means you can see sort of their facial expressions to how they're reacting to things you're saying or things they're doing. But I think independent tasks online, there's a bit more distance, so I think you're able to set them potentially a bit more easily, and I think they're slightly less awkward to some degree, albeit I'm sure tutors will tell me quite the reverse. Duration of lesson. I think one thing about online is that we don't often, because we're not having to move, there's not the geography involved, so I'm not late. The student might not be late. I mean, obviously they've got to come back from school, so that could be problematic. But I just feel like lesson length, there's an element of freedom with duration there. So if you've done really great work, but we've only spent 45 minutes online, because I haven't invested in that travel to get to you, we definitely have tutors who go, great, let's stop it there. There's no point in trying to eke out the last 15 minutes, because the reality is you've covered almost everything that I wanted to cover in the hour, but you've done it much shorter, in a much shorter period of time. And that's because you've just been working really, really well, and almost kind of rewarding a student in that way. I mean, obviously you can't do it all the time, but and obviously you've got to make sure parents' expectations are managed with respect to that. But I think that's quite an interesting one that we were discussing the other day. Obviously, more resources. I think online you do have these wonderful resources that I've mentioned: Desmos, Wolfram Alpha, the white LearnCube's amazing array of tools that you can utilize. Not to mention the ability to mirror, so bring in web resources, etc. Also have multiple screens going, so that you can be looking at other things, potentially planning another task very easily, succinctly on another screen, whilst your student is doing an independent task. Not to mention things like automatic assessment tools that you could use. I know you could use them in the classroom, but you'd have to have some technology to help you do that. So you could cut the marking time down. You could see how quickly they're accumulating information. So I think that's one thing. But the other thing, which I'm a big pedant for, because I do like neat work, is I just think resources management. The way things are laid out on boards, I've taught both online and in person, both in classes and one-to-one, and I just think the way that you can set out a board is just really neat. And I don't have the neatest handwriting, but I really like that. And LearnCube have that autocorrect when your stylus is using, which is really nice. But you just think about it, like if you had like a box with the objectives at the top, you can have maybe an independent task box, so your starter. Right, these are my instructions. Look at the board. I'd love you to look at this box. You could even denote a color to it. You could say it's always in the top left. You can have, I don't know, the top of the board keywords that you're learning over the sequence of lessons you're looking at. I just think the way you can set things out is so much easier. And I worry in maths, what we often do is a lot of practice, and we just disregard that practice. It's gone. We've done it. It's moved on. Whereas here on a board, I just feel like you could set it out very clearly. So it means that we can have a key reference point. Yeah, as you're doing, kind of lines, sort of delineating on our board. And obviously, because boards are infinite sometimes in space, or it just means you've got so much more scope. One thing I would say about boards in infinite space is just I tend to like, and we tend to encourage tutors to take a PDF or a picture of the board when it's finished, that lesson, so we can see what was achieved in that milestone. And I just think that's so useful. And also send it straight to the parents, or better yet, have a Dropbox or some sort of shared work folder system where the parents can access immediately what they're looking at. Not only can they see via the link that's unique to the learning experience you're having with the student, but they can also access the kind of Dropbox or file sharing mechanism that you're using, which has got a PDF of what we're doing. And I think that's also a really great revision tool. So those would be the kind of things that are there. One thing I would say is a bit of a con to online in my concern, not con as in sort of devious, but more of a, pros and cons, is I just think reading the room is trickier. So for example, you at the moment, Alex, are just a bit away from me. So actually kind of you've also like your eyes and seeing the pupils and the difference between those is just quite difficult. And I think just making sure you set up that camera to the best of your ability. So at the moment, I'm pushing slightly to the right. That's probably not great. I'd want my head front and center, but where my eyes are, that's okay. But if I could come a bit closer as a student, if I'm trying to read, then you can see reactions quite quickly when you ask a question. You can see, ask a question, and I might sit there. If I'm looking down at the ground, looking up, or if I'm perhaps if I have intonation at the end of my voice, again making sure that you can hear. I think there are non-verbal cues that online, arguably, people suggest that you can't pick up on as neatly. We've had a real big debate about that in Keystone. I do think the majority could be overcome, but again, I think it's about setup. It's about making sure that you can help your student to learn how to get the best out of the online learning experience. Again, not math specific necessarily, but I still think super relevant.
I think it sort of comes down to professionalism. Like all of these things, like there's such a range of delivery online. You could argue, everyone's totally familiar with tutoring online, but that tutoring online could be somebody effectively lecturing at you for 30 minutes. I mean, you've just given probably hundreds of different like little small gems and techniques. And isn't that exactly what a professional does? Is they are aware of the nuances within their profession and what they do, and they do those to the best of their abilities. So I think there is that range.
I think awareness though comes from reflection, and I think what we are doing, I was critical of it myself when I was a teacher, is you're just moving from lesson to lesson. You're not really stopping and thinking about, did I explain adding fractions there? Could I do it better? Is there a better way of doing this? And taking that time and building that time in, and that goes for things like whiteboard skills. You mentioned it. Making sure, can I be better at working the whiteboard? Can the whiteboard do more for me? There's often a phrase in sport that's used, which is let the ball do the work, which basically means pass the ball more, because the ball can move much quicker than a human, and that's true. But I often think that phrase can be translated within whiteboards. I think ask yourself when you're using a board, how many of those tools are you actually using? And I think it may be a sense that there are lots of tools there that you don't know about that you could use. And I know people like LearnCube have loads of information about how best to use their boards, sort of guidance, top tips. Have you read those? And I just think the average student goes, well, no, I'm happy, I've got it on. And what I'm basically going to try and replicate is what I did when I did it one-to-one in person. And I'm going to try and replicate the thing online. And I'm not saying the intention shouldn't be there, but I am saying in another sentence, I guess, you need to make sure that your environment, you really understand it. And that basically means in a whiteboard, knowing what every button on the page means. So, wouldn't it be great at the very least to be able to understand what each of the buttons do or does? And I do think that would be significantly advantageous with respect to potentially improving your work.